It will.
You can make it short, so you don't have to read all that.
I have a little bit of
I should have sent you something shorter. Sorry about that. But you can make it brief, less, that's fine.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. To give Dr. Petereit as much time as possible. Before I introduce him, I'd just like to make one announcement. We had kind of specialized in South Dakota presenters here in the fall. We had kind of specialized in South Dakota speakers here in the fall, with leading off with Dr. Petereit from Rapid City Regional. And we were following up with two folks from Crow Creek. One of the persons involved, individuals involved in suicide prevention with youth, and then the CEO of the IHS clinic in Fort Thompson. I'm not sure we're going to get our October speaker, so we may be having to cancel or make an adjustment at the last second. That's only 2 weeks from now, so we'll see how that goes. But just so you're aware. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Petereit, who got in yesterday afternoon and was kind enough to rush in here and turn around and fly back out today. Dr. Petereit is a board-certified radiation oncologist living in Rapid City. He's a professor at the Sanford School of Medicine at the University of South Dakota and an adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. That's in Madison. And he's received practice recognition in brachytherapy through the American Board of Radiology. He's a board examiner for the American Board of Radiology and Gynecologic Oncology. He's one of the editors for the online journal Frontiers in Oncology. He works with the International Cancer Experts Corps, and he's worked with the International Atomic Energy Agency to develop treatment guidelines for cervical cancer and the use of brachytherapy for other malignancies. He's principal investigator on a number of grants funded by the MCI, and he has over 80 publications and peer-reviewed cancer journals. His clinical research area is in the area of gynecologic cancer, prostate cancer, brachytherapy, cancer disparities, intensively modulated radiotherapy in clinical trials, and his work has gotten combined over $14 million in grant funding. So he knows his field and he knows how to write grants, which is important today. The research that he brings here today is the NCI-funded Walking Forward program that has been continuously funded since 2002. I have more here, but he's encouraged me to be brief. So I'm going to let him talk about the rest of Walking Forward and what it's designed to do and some of the outcomes. So thank you, Dan, for coming and presenting.
Thank you, Wes. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to welcome Dr. Cower, who's one of my mentors on this program, and really have a story to tell you. And it's kind of a crazy story in a way, because I'm by training a radiation oncologist, and I'm from South Dakota originally. I did my training at UW-Madison, was on staff there for 5 years, and then I relocated to western South Dakota in Rapid City, Black Hills. I'm just kind of a show of hands. Does anybody not know where Rapid City is? I'll show you a map in a little bit, so just to give you an idea of what planet I'm from. So we actually do have buildings. That's something bad on the first slide. So it really is kind of serendipity and good fortune that I've been able to launch this program with the assistance of many people. And again, Dr. Judith Cower from Mayo Clinic was one of the principal investigators. And I have no financial relationships to disclose or using off-label investigational agents to discuss those. But the objectives for the next hour, and I have a tendency to present too many slides and talk too quickly, so just slow me down. So I'm going to talk about this program that we've had since 2002 that's been funded through the NCI. The name of our program is called Walking Forward. That's the user-friendly name that we're known as the reservations. I want to get into what our initial objectives. One, there's 3 phases to our program that go by funding periods from 2002 to 2007, 2007 to 2012, and then we're in the 3rd phase of Walking Forward, which is a smoking cessation study, but there are many common themes. We currently have the smoking cessation program I'll get into at the end. discuss a new initiative involved. It's called the International Cancer Expert Corps, and talk a little bit about why we moved the grants from Rapid City to Sioux Falls and Avera. It has to do with sustainability with that question that's come up. And then there's always being in Rochester, want to think about ways that we can collaborate with you folks. And Dr. John Tilbert, we're working with his group now on our prostate study. But as I was walking around last night, it kind of saddened me a little bit in that, does everybody here familiar with the NCCTG? It was a Mayo-driven clinical trials group, the North Central Cancer Treatment Group. That was a phenomenal cooperative group that was Mayo-driven and brought all the community oncologists in. So I used to come here twice a year. I was on committees with Dr. Power for Disparity Committee for North Central, as well as co-chair of Radiation Oncology Committee. But it's really sad that, in my mind, that group went away. It's because the Institute of Medicine wanted the clinical trial groups to go from 14 to 4, and so North Central was absorbed into the alliance. But I think it was a real loss to the community oncologists, because it was a great way to collaborate with Mayo, and we still do. Most of our patients, if they leave Rapid City, they get on I-90 and they travel 9 hours down the road or down the interstate, and so this is where most of the patients come from for their tertiary care. I'm not going to get into the problem, but Dr. Espy publishes this probably every 3 to 5 years. This is a mortality index ratio that looks at Northern Plains versus other IHS regions, but it's well known that the Northern Plains in Alaska has the highest cancer mortality rate compared to the other IHS regions. When we initially put in for this grant, we'll get into the details, we looked at our own tumor registry. This is a bit of a complicated slide, but it really shows that for the American Indian versus non-native population, that for every screen detectable cancer, that they present with more advanced stages of disease. So that's the disparity here, is that the mortality rates are higher for Northern Plains American Indians, and part of that is because they present with more advanced stages of cancer. So what happened is the CDRP, so we're part of what's called the CDRP partnership. This is an NCI initiative that was announced in 2001, but it stands for Cancer Disparity Research Partnership. They wanted to reverse the cycle of funding, where they wanted these large grants, these are R01s, to go to community cancer centers, and then you would partner with an academic institution. Translation, the community cancer center received the indirect money. So that's a huge paradigm shift in funding. But their goal was to increase minority access to and participation in clinical trials, to increase the number of clinical and translational scientists studying cancer disparities, develop new institutions' ability to engage in long-term research efforts, and to investigate new areas of health disparities research. The target institutions, so I relocated from Madison, Wisconsin to Rapid City. People wondered, I lost my mind because things were going fine at that time. I had backgrounds in oncology. But there's some personal reasons I wanted to do it from the state, and the Black Hills are a nice part to live. But part of the challenge when I moved out there in 1999 was they were kind of a basic cancer center, but about a third of patients were leaving because they really got behind. So it took a couple of years to get them up to speed with the technology that was required. So when this grant came out, some of the requirements were that you had to have state-of-the-art radiation oncology facilities. Now it's a little bit odd that a public health grant's going to a radiation oncology center. I'll try to discuss why that is. 2 is access to a population that suffers the consequences of cancer disparities, which in our neck of the woods is the American Indians. And thirdly is someone crazy enough to take it on, which is yours truly. So it did help that I had 5 years of research experience on staff at UW-Madison. So really the pioneers for this in this slide are Norm Coleman, who's on your left, not the senator from Minnesota, but Norm Coleman, who ran Harvard Radiation Oncology and then relocated to the NCI with Frank Govern, who's to my left. But they're the brains of this whole. They wanted to, at that time, they were trying to do the same model with Harvard Oncology. Back then it was called the Joint Center for Radiation Therapy. But they're the ones that went to the NCI and did appropriations for $22.5 million for 5-year funding for these cancer centers. So, we partnered initially with both Rochester University, Wisconsin. We're the only CDRP site in the middle of the U.S. The others are kind of clustered on either the southeast, the northeast, and then one group in LA. So we put in the grant, and I'll tell you what the research plan was in a moment. The official name of the grant was Enhancing Native American Participation on Radiation Trials. If I go to the reservation and say that, they'll look at me like I'm Dr. Strangelove. It's like, what are you talking about? So one of our staff came up with the logo of Walking Forward, and the idea is that we weren't going to be a fly-by-night operation. We're going to do what we all know is community-based participatory research. We're going to take our time in making sure the communities understood why we were doing this to engage the community. So I had one day of euphoria where we received a $5.4 million grant. That's pretty cool. And I came to work the next day like, okay, how am I going to do this? So the chaos begins. So for those of you that haven't been to South Dakota, even though there's North Dakota and South Dakota, it's also divided into East River and West River. Missouri runs down the middle. And so I work primarily, Rapid City is clustered in the Black Hills. We had a bunch of visitors that came through here about a month ago called the Sturgis Rally, so we had 1 million extra people out there, but they kind of flooded the plains. So the 3 tribal communities that we work with are Pine Ridge, which is the largest reservation, followed by Rosebud and Cheyenne River. We will work with the other tribal communities, but those are the 3 reservations that predominantly come to Rapid City for the health care. Plus there's the urban population. Population density, you can see in this demographic that obviously the native populations are going to be clustered where the reservations are. Unfortunately, 4 of the 10 forest counties in the U.S. are in our region, and that's because of the poverty that happens in these communities, which is probably one of the root causes of the disparities. So the gap here is that in my small world as an oncologist, these patients are presenting with more advanced stages of cancer. What were we going to do? What was our hypothesis? So we put into the grant, and Dr. Judith Cower from Rochester and Dinesh Mayo from the University of Wisconsin were really instrumental in helping me put this together. But we wanted to look at assessing barriers to early cancer detection. At that time, everybody knows about patient navigation. Everyone's a patient navigator. You go to the hotel, and the concierge is a patient navigator. So that term has really become, it's lost its original meaning. But this was going to be a part of our program. Recruitment to clinical trials was a priority, and so we wanted to try to embed some of these into the North Central group, NCCTG. One of the primary hypotheses was that the average distance that patients travel to Rapid City is about 140 miles one way. Could that be an impediment to presenting with earlier stages of disease? So one of the things that we wanted to look at was shorter radiation schedules for common disease sites such as prostate and breast cancer. So that's where we talk about brachytherapy and IMRT, and these may be words not familiar to you, but I'll give it back a little bit. So a primary hypothesis is that these interventions would lead to patients presenting with earlier stages of cancer. So I would get a call from Frank Government about every 3 to 4 months from the NCI, and it was, after a while my blood pressure would go up, so it's like my mom calling me. It's like, Dan, I want to know, how come you don't have anybody on the study yet? And this slide here, it's not meant for you to read it, but it shows that it takes a lot of time to get the program running, to give the tribal members the support. So at one point, I think at these slides last night, we had at least a dozen protocols. And for each protocol, they're required a trip to each tribal community. I need to get letter support from IHS, from the health board, and you present to them. So at one point, for every study that we opened, we needed 7 letters of support. The other slide I did show was we went to the IRBs, in Aberdeen area IRB, Mayo's IRB, University of Wisconsin's IRB, and Rapid City's IRB. And you can't get approval for that overnight. So there was this delay, it appeared, of about 12 to 18 months. We couldn't get anyone on a patient navigation protocol, which is not an intervention, it's just helping the patients, although there was a survey. So it just takes a while, and that's one of the lessons learned. So conceptually, what we're trying to influence ultimately is, can we somehow change the stage of presentation? And that's a complex question. And we decided to address this through a variety of interventions. So get off that. So one of the things that we did, and Dr. Cower and others have seen parts of this many times, but I wanted to tell the whole story. The foundation of our program is really patient navigation, and it's based out of what Harold Freeman did in New York City, where their navigation program they would influence the stage of presentation for African American women with breast cancer. So one was the community navigation program. There is a group out there called CHRs, they're called Community Health Representatives, but they're lay health workers. And so we wanted to use that model, and we call them CHRs, or Community Research Representatives. And they were really, these were all native, for the most part, native folks with some type of background. Some were LPNs, some were RNs. Most were probably high school education, but they had an interest in doing this, they had a CHR background. But their goal was really to promote education, networking. They were really our boots on the ground in all three reservations at that time: Cheyenne River, Rosebud, and Pine Ridge. Then there was the cancer navigation program, and that's probably what more patients or more people are familiar with, and that's really to help the Native Americans navigate through the complexities of their health treatment. Whether it's right or wrong, I tend to use American Indian, Native American, and Natives interchangeably. Probably the more proper term is American Indians. But we really wanted to try to identify what some of the barriers were to cancer treatment. So all these interventions, and I'll just briefly touch on a few of these, some of this is asking the obvious, but you have to statistically prove that these are issues, because that's how you gain the next round of funding. That's part of the goal here. These are our community staff. This is Pine Ridge. This is Doris Thiebel. She has been down in Pine Ridge for 30 years. She has been an absolutely phenomenal individual to work with. Simone Bordeaux, she's out of Rosebud. She's a relatively young navigator, but investigator. Again, she has done a phenomenal job for us. And then in Rapid City, we have Kristen and Dave. So one of the things that we did, the slide got a little bit mixed up, is we did a community survey. This survey was 1,000 participants, and these are not cancer patients, but we were looking at what were the barriers to patients coming in. What were the barriers that were perceived in the community of why patients don't come in for screening, education, things of that nature. And so this was really developed, I should have drew this name on this, but with Mayo, with University of Wisconsin, and some of the results from this, I'm just going to briefly go through this, but Native Americans presented with more advanced stages of screen detectable cancers than non-natives, so that's a big issue. About 50% versus 25%. And of the screen detectable cancers, which are prostate, breast, cervix, and lung, and colorectal, the identifying diagnosis with a screening test for about 40% of the Native American versus 70% of the non-natives. Again, indicating that cancer screening was markedly underutilized in this population. And so the strongest determinant of someone receiving cancer screening for a specific cancer site was a health provider, whether it's an RN, mid-level, or physician recommending that test, because it tends to be like the American IHS. So some of those, this has all been published, but a lot of what came out of that survey led to interventions for the second phase of Watching Forward that I'll get into. We looked at Native Americans who were navigated to look at there's a change in levels of mistrust and satisfaction. One of the things that I wanted to look at from a radiation perspective, especially for curative cancers, was there a reduction in the treatment interruptions? In other words, was a compliance rate better if you had someone helping to navigate you through the treatments? And it improved by about as much as a week. Now, this isn't randomized data, but it certainly was strongly suggested. When you think of someone coming into Rochester, this is an overwhelming system, although you know, a phenomenal job getting patients through here and navigating them through the system. I would argue probably a lot of patients have resources coming here. Now you have someone that not only has cancer, but they have very limited resources. And so how do you help them navigate through the complexity of their cancer treatments? And one of the most difficult cancers to treat are head and neck cancers. And we actually would have one of our navigators go to the hotel room and bring them in for their treatment because they were too sick. So this was a very intense navigation. About 20% of those patients were entered in some type of clinical trial who were navigated. Also, as part of the protocol design, we were able to give out nearly $600,000 in financial assistance over an 8-year period of time. They had to meet certain qualifications. We did not want to replace funding from IHS, but we were trying to do kind of a bridge. So, but this slide does get into the intensity of the navigation process. So, what was the impact of patient navigation? Ashley Guatemala has done a lot of the work for us. She's a Native American researcher that's done at MD Anderson. But we were able to show that there was improved compliance rates, there was enhancement of the overall experience. I didn't show that particular cancer survey. We really weren't able to show any trust in change in trust towards the healthcare system, because that's really kind of a complex issue to try to tackle, but there was still kind of a level of mistrust that persisted. But a big part of what all of our navigators do, is most of our Native American, is cultural competency. So now switching into clinical trials, because from the NCI's perspective, they wanted two things from us. They wanted to know how many papers do you publish and how many people go on studies. I mean, that's the language they speak, and that's fine, but so it took a while to get this up and running. I don't need to tell anyone here what the importance of clinical trials are, especially since some of the most important cancer advances have come from this institution. But it's obviously well documented, the importance of clinical trials. That's how we make gains. It has been shown that patients that participate in clinical trials tend to do better than those that don't. And it's also been shown that physicians who participate in clinical trials tend to take better care of their patients. So maybe it's a selection process, but nationally, the minority participation rate is quite low. It's 3% or less. And one of the hypotheses that originally was, with racial discrepancies in clinical trial participation, would that somehow relate to cancer disparities? Again, it's hypothesis generated. So one of the newer, and this is now standard of care, but IMRT stands for intensity modulated radiotherapy. Don't worry, I'm not going to digress into a radiation oncology lecture, but the basic premise is you want to hit the tumor, you want to stay off the normal tissues. And this was a game changer 15 years ago. This was a University of Wisconsin invention, and actually Mayo was at the table as far as one of the financiers of this whole program as an investor. So we started this program back in 2001, and there was a few headaches because it was technology that wasn't quite ready for prime time. But once the equipment was up and running, and I'm not going to get into those details, your proton center, which there's going to be very few proton centers in the U.S. because they're undoubtedly expensive, but it's the same premise, although they take it to the next level. You hit the tumor and you stay out the normal tissues. That's obviously what you want to do with pediatrics. But for common disease sites, for prostate cancer, one of the trials that we were able to participate in with Mark Ritter, who is a radiation oncologist at the University of Wisconsin, was condensing external beam radiation from 38 treatments down to as few as 12 treatments. So addressing that barrier of geographic distance, we didn't get down to level 3, but basically what this study did, and this was 5 different institutions, and we wanted to be a little bit behind everybody else because you're talking about giving, so how do you go from 38 treatments to 12? Well, you give a larger dose of fraction, but you have to have the technology that allows you to immobilize the patient to see the tumor and to safely do it. So we put about 50 people on this study, and we did get down to level 2. So this is potentially a problem where I live in a small community and I see my patients on the lake, I see them at the grocery store. Last thing I want to do is be giving my patients rectal bleeding for a cancer that now you could argue doesn't need to be treated, or there's other options. So this trial has been published several times. Not surprisingly, this was an early stage cohort, but the biochemical control rates, meaning the PSAs, were undetectable, were comparable to anything else out there. The reality is you could do surgery and any type of radiation and probably achieve high cure rates, but you want to do it in a safe fashion. And this premise of this particular trial was to do it in a more convenient fashion. So that was one of the successes of putting 50 people on this particular study. Now, switching to breast cancer, I would say that the incidence of various cancers mimics the Caucasian or the non-native population out there as far as lung, breast, prostate, colorectal. But when I moved to Rapid City in 1999, the mastectomy rates were really high, and they probably should be around maybe 30 to 40% in that range. Back in the early 90s, there was a report came out from Dartmouth that the mastectomy rates were 99% in western South Dakota. That's phenomenally high. And so I think there was a lot of reasons for that, but one of them could have been that women that lived 2 to 3 hours away. So for example, up until, I would say 5 years ago, the standard approach for women who wants breast preservation, meaning instead of a mastectomy to do a lumpectomy and radiation, would be to do whole breast radiation delivered with a machine that looks like this, a linear accelerator. It takes 6 weeks to do this because you're not only treating the area at risk, but you're also treating the whole breast. So there's 2 goals. One is you want to eliminate the microscopic cells in the breast, but also you want to preserve the breast, meaning that if you did the radiation in 5 years or 2 to 3 years later, the breast was all shriveled up and we should have done a mastectomy. So that's why it takes 6 weeks. What emerged actually 20 years ago was to do a shorter course of radiation with a device called brachytherapy, and we could do this in 5 days. And when we started the program back in 2002, this again wasn't ready for prime time. In my background in radiation oncology is to do brachytherapy for GYN, cancers primarily, as well as prostate. But in this slide here, instead of using a machine to deliver daily radiation for 6 weeks, a device can be placed in the breast, either a balloon or one of these catheters. This has kind of gone away because there are these modified balloons that can be placed in the breast. But the mechanics of this are, if a woman is eligible, and it's typically stage 1 breast cancer, 2 to 3 centimeters or less, negative margins, negative lymph nodes, a week later the surgeon will place either a balloon or one of these modified balloons into the breast. And then the following week, that device is hooked up to this machine, and a little radioactive pellet goes out of that machine, travels either into this balloon or down to each one of these struts to radiate the breast cavity itself. We're not treating the whole breast, we're doing partial breast radiation. And so the formal name for this is accelerated partial breast irradiation. There's a mouthful. But the premise is it's not any better than external beam radiation as far as preventing the cancer from recurring, but it's more convenient. So that was also a study that we wanted to open, and again, this had to go through all the IRBs, and back in 2002, this was not considered a standard treatment, so it wasn't a randomized trial, but we got several women who said, it's either a mastectomy or I'm going to do the breast brachytherapy, and they wouldn't be randomized to this. Even if we had a randomization, there was a national trial being conducted. So we put about 70 patients on the study, again, about 15 to 20% were Native American. There was a high compliance rate, and it addressed the need of distance from the cancer center. Now, interestingly, this report came out in the Journal of Clinical Oncology about 3 years ago, and it looked at the high-end brachytherapy sites in the U.S., which is dark blue. Most of those are clustered in high-density population areas. Interestingly, Western South Dakota is one of the high-end users. And so this is an example where an NCI grant was able to bring new technologies to a relatively remote part of the country. We took about 2 years to get this program up and running. But it's a service, all these trials that we offer were both for the entire population, not just the native population. So that was kind of interesting when that was published. On a related note, there is a PhD nurse, Nancy Faringwell, who's now I think the dean of the nursing school at Brookings, South Coast State University, where they went out, so a little bit of a diversion here, but hang there with me for a moment. They wanted to look at what were the determinants why women, not just Native, but all women in South Dakota were choosing lumpectomy, breast preservation, meaning lumpectomy plus or minus radiation, or mastectomy. If you look at the mastectomy rates, as you can imagine, the further you get to the cancer center, like urban versus small rural, the higher the mastectomy rates. So the mastectomy rates overall, this cohort of women, which is about 1,000 women, is still around 40 to 45%, so still pretty high. But when I saw this data being presented a few years ago, it was about 2 years ago, one of the things that we did in 2007 to address a patient need is we started a breast patient navigation program that had its roots in walking forward. So now we have one of our navigators through the hospital saw the value of having a navigator for all Native patients. We had a number of women through the surveys that were being conducted felt that their needs were not being addressed. So the hospital hired, independent of any grant money, they just did it themselves. With our input, they hired a breast navigator to basically help women kind of, again, address the complexities of cancer treatments. And so all these women since 2007, after a biopsy after a woman has a positive biopsy in Rapid City, South Dakota, they're immediately referred to the breast navigator, who will get them a referral to the surgeon, to the oncologist, so they can see the whole team of specialists so they can make a decision. My goal is not to talk a woman out of a mastectomy, but it's to give her the options. So as I was listening to their program, this previous slide about what the mastectomy rates, I thought, well, why don't we look at a couple of time eras here? And that is, let's look at the patients who underwent breast patient navigation from 2007 to 2012 and 617 patients, and compare them to the navigation patients to see if there's been any change in the breast conservation and breast preservation rate. Again, hypothesis generating, this isn't randomized data, but the more you look at JCO, Journal of Clinical Oncology, and other oncology journals, you see a lot of SEER-related publications. So that was the hypothesis. Would this breast navigator reduce the mastectomy rates over time? So on this slide here, this is again for all patients that we see in the Cancer Center. The SEER data, this is the baseline breast conservation rate. This is where it's at nationally. And what you can see over time since 2000 is now, since about 2008 or so, the breast health, if you want to call it that, or breast conservation rates now mimic the SEER database, which is good news. Now, the thing so I submitted this to the Journal of Clinical Oncology. It was rejected. It's hard to get anything published in that journal, and that's fine. But they said you need to go back and do an interrupted time series analysis because it's much more complicated than just having a breast navigator, where there are other compounding factors as far as a new surgeon that came into town. And so I'm not a statistician, but one of our biostats people from UW Seattle did this, and we really couldn't see that it was because of a breast navigator. So the null hypothesis turned out to be, well, we couldn't prove that a navigator was the sole reason for an improvement or reduction in the mastectomy rates. However, I would still argue it's good that it's where it should be at this point. So our interpretation of this, and we've submitted this to a couple of journals, and I think there's a number of factors that improve the breast conservation rates. One is to have an impact. There's a dedicated breast navigator. We've had new surgeons that have come to our community. The breast brachytherapy program, the 17% of those patients have been with breast brachytherapy in the last 5 years compared to like 2 or 3% prior to that. So I think it's due to a number of factors. It's probably not just due to one thing in itself. But I think the good news for patients in our part of the country is that the breast health, so to speak, is comparable in regards to breast preservation rates is what it is for the rest of the country. Now switching gears again, going back to clinical trials, this is the 2-year data on rectal bleeding rates for the tomotherapy or IMRT trial. They were 2 to 3 times higher in this population that underwent a shorter course of radiation, which is what was postulated, but all these resolved over time. So one of the things that we wanted to do, and again, Dr. Power was helpful in this, is we wanted to look at a gene called ATM to see if there was a SNP variant. So SNP is a single nucleotide polymorphism. And so the hypothesis was, when we wrote the grant, is my partners at that time thought there was at least some clinical evidence or observational evidence in the clinic that the natives tend to have more radiation toxicity than non-natives. So we proposed this study, and University of Wisconsin did all the DNA analysis where we drew the blood of 100 natives, 100 non-natives, to see if there was a difference in the ATM heterozygosity rate, meaning was there some type of marker for patients that are predisposed to having a radiation complication. Because in my world, that's the holy grail. So if you have a guy with prostate cancer, working with Dr. Tobin on this, if you were to be able to tell a patient, if we do this blood test, and if you have this SNP variant, you are more prone to developing rectal bleeding and impotency, and you have an equal option between surgery and radiation, that would be invaluable. So that was kind of the premise of this. So ATM is a huge gene that's involved in DNA repair, and I'm not going to show you all the lab data from this, but why do we want to look at this? We thought maybe this could be another barrier to patients coming in for treatment, but we could not find any higher prevalence of these SNP variants in the natives versus non-natives. Now it turns out if you want to do these kind of studies, it takes 10 to 20,000 patients. It takes a phenomenal number of patients to do these radiogenomic studies. But the good news is that we had hardly anyone who declined to do this. So we were initially told you'll never be able to do a genetic study in a minority population. And so this is one of the last trials that we opened because there was a lot of trepidation about what had happened down in the Southwest with that whole debacle that me as a white radiation oncologist is never going to be able to go in these communities and say we want to test your DNA to see if there's some type of variant. So as we're putting in for other studies now, and we'll get into what we've done for sustainability, the personalized medicine, the biomarking, this is helpful for us to have the foundation that we can all do these studies. Now remember, these were cancer patients. It's probably going to be a little more difficult when you have a non-cancer patient that wants to donate blood for DNA. But it undertaking, and it took about 3 journals to get this thing finally published. And the part of the story is, could you actually do it? Other thing that we looked at was clinical trial enrollment, and I'm going to briefly go through some of this, but when we looked at the patients who were navigated, Native Americans who were navigated, determined why they were or weren't placed on a clinical trial. Common reasons were for about 30% of the patients, they were advanced stage where the performance status was too poor. They were just too sick to go on a clinical trial. There were no clinical trials available for that cancer site, and then there was a variety of other reasons. But the predominant theme of why we couldn't put more Native Americans in clinical trials is that their stages of presentation were too advanced or they were too sick. And we did have studies available for about every common disease site. So some of the lessons that we've learned, if we ever had any impact on designing some clinical trials, maybe we will at some point. One would be less restrictive eligibility criteria. Does it really matter if your PD-1 is 21 versus 20? Sometimes there's just some black and white eligibility criteria that are kind of silly. Phase 2 and 3 trials for common disease sites, genomic-driven medicines we're getting into now with a partnership that we have with the Mayo and Sioux Falls. And then there's always insurance issues. The insurance carriers in our part of the country don't want to cover clinical trials. It's silly, even when the drugs are being provided for free. So that's been another challenge, which will be another challenge when we're talking about genomic medicine. So the pyramid, you can't read the top of that pyramid is enrollment of patients on clinical trials. And to get to that point, you have to have a foundation. And the big foundation is establishing trust among the American Indian population. And that's really where the patient navigation program comes in. You can't walk into these communities and say, I want to do study X without having some foundation, or it's much more challenging. And as you go up the pyramid, you're looking at, for phase 2 of walking forward, we'll get into next, is how do you get patients in the door? How can you influence the stage of presentation so that it's more 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4? So it's a complex question of how do you get people on clinical trials, but the first thing is you've got to start by establishing that trust. And so it took us almost 12 to 18 months to put anyone on study, and it took several trips to each IHS facility to describe to them what we're trying to do. So for the phase 2 of walking forward, in phase 1, we had a cancer screening, we had a navigator at the cancer center, we had a community navigator, which is our CHR, but one of the premises, or one of the results from our community survey was, if you had someone within the IHS clinic that could basically promote cancer screening, they would do it. And so it actually took a letter from our congressional delegation. We just have one representative because of our low population and 2 senators, but it required a letter from each of the 3 of those folks to each of the IHS facilities to put a walking forward navigator in the clinic. But it happened. I mean, that's how much effort it takes sometimes. So in the phase 2, what we really wanted to concentrate on is this cancer screening coordinator. So this was an LPN or RN that was embedded within the IHS clinic in all the tribal hospitals, including Rapid City, and she would be the go-to person for getting screening accomplished. This is the number of screenings. This slide's a little bit old, but we've helped conduct, or I should say facilitate, over 2,000 screenings for screen-detectable cancers. But if you actually look at the number of cancers that you pick up, it's quite small. And so this is a very labor-intensive initiative to try to pick up a relatively small number of cancers. On the other hand, when Walking Forward is out there in the community, helping to promote screening, education, trying to give things back, it's helped our presence as far as trying to continue and getting tribal letters of support. This data, which is yet to be published, and they're looking at this again, we're having some challenges trying to get the biostatistician to rerun these numbers. But when you look at the pre-Walking Forward era versus the Walking Forward era, there is a suggestion now that patients are presenting with earlier stages of cancer. Now, it would be really arrogant for me to stand up here and say that's because of our program. You would really have to do a very detailed interrupted time series analysis. Maybe we've had a little bit of impact on that, but it's really hard to account for other things such as general messages that the community gets. American Cancer Society does a lot of work in these communities. But the good news is, regardless, is we are seeing a little bit of a shift towards Native Americans presenting with earlier stages of cancer, which helps for fundability. So before I get into phase 3, from the first 2 phases of the program, which is 10 years, Some of the critical outcomes, we're enrolling about 10% of the population to clinical trials. We put about 4,000 American Indians on various research studies, and a lot of that includes the social science studies, but that does require IRB protocol and consent. With the patient navigation program, significant reduction in the number of missed treatment days among navigated versus non-navigated patients. Identification of specific barriers to effective cancer screening. That's where the cancer navigator or screening coordinator came in. The successful completion of a genetic study, established of trusting partnerships with these communities, and really the creation of research infrastructure to address new research questions. So we've had many people over the years, so Deidre Buchwald at the University of Washington, Seattle, John Tobert's group, we're working with them now, Dr. Tobert's group, where if someone has a question that they would like to implement or some program in the tribal communities, we can go to the IRB on their behalf and to have the infrastructure to do this. So it's really helped us with issues of sustainability. And this is just showing the slide again where the whole goal is to improve cancer cure rates. But when you look at the population of these communities, we need a lot more navigators to do this. But we're hoping at some point IHS will see the value of this and want to permanently employ as a position a cancer screening navigator. So this is phase 3. We're still tapping into funds from phase 2 because of carry forward requests, and we have a cervical cancer project going on right now where we're going to be looking at using vaginal self-assessments. We're going to be doing HPV analysis on some of these patients to get a partnership that we have with UW Seattle. But one of the things that I see in the clinic is, even though we don't see a huge number of cervical cancer patients, those that walk in the door are all stage 3 and 4. And it's stunning when we have a cancer that's very potentially preventable, and we caught it early. Surgery is a great option, but rarely do we see a Native American woman come in with a surgically operable cervical cancer. So we're trying to get some pilot data with the carry forward funds. Now, back in 2011, we knew that we were going to be winding down the second phase of walking forward. I was on my sabbatical at the University of Wisconsin, and a medical oncologist there, his name was Richard Love. He told me about a partnership that he'd established with this gentleman. He goes by Iqbal for short. He's right here in this picture. He's a computer scientist, and they've been working on assessing breast cancer and palliative care issues in Bangladesh using cell phone technology. What does that have to do with where I live? So we got strategizing about all this, and we came up with a project where we wanted to, it's a smoking cessation project, and it's in response to, at that time it was called provocative question number 4 from the NCI, but we wanted to look at, in this case, it's still a realm of cancer, but rather than, we're trying to get patients, we're trying to catch patients earlier, screening, early detection, but why don't we move things upstream further and look at smoking cessation? So this is a randomized trial that we've launched. We have 1 year to go, but it is a mobile health smoking cessation study. The research questions are, why don't more people alter behaviors known to increase the risk of cancers? And in this case, why don't Northern Plain American Indians alter tobacco use? This is not ceremonial tobacco, but commercial tobacco, even though they know it's bad for them. And so this project was put together through investigators, including Linda Burhan-Stepanoff and her group. It includes Linda Krebs, Iqbal. He is the computer scientist that helps with the cell phone apps, Mark Dignan and Stephen Smith. And so it took a while to pull this off. And to get, we got the funding, so that was the good news. It was how we going to implement this. So what this looks like, it's a randomization where everybody gets 1 of 4 interventions, and they have nicotine replacement, either minimal or intense. They either get the patch or they get patch plus lozenges or gum. There's pre-cessation counseling, post-cessation counseling, and then everyone gets a cell phone, and they have customized text messages to help them quit smoking. And so it's a very intense intervention. Our community staff, we probably have up to 12 to 15 interventions with each participant. We have carbon monoxide measurements to make sure that they quit smoking, but we've enrolled about, we're close to finishing this up. Now, even after the last person is randomized, we'll need to follow them for another 6 or 12 months. So it's kind of amazing, though, you can have someone in a remote part of the country in Pine Ridge that has a cell phone was getting customized text messages from Marquette University, but it's been working. And sometimes it's kind of like some of the radiation machines. I'm not sure how they work, but I know they work. So it's good news that we've been able to pull this off, and hopefully it's going to lead to other interventions. So getting into a little bit of lessons learned, these are my observations, having worked in this for, I've got a few more slides to go since 2002, looking at the time. Community buy-in is critical. And even before we put in for the grant, one of the first things I did is I went out to tribal communities to introduce them who I was, that there are some services that are available in Rapid City that previously weren't available before. There's an inherent conflict, I think, with the NCI of community goals versus NCI goals. It all works together, but when you're talking about trying to get these programs up and running, you can appreciate why they can get a little bit nervous when they put all these money in these communities. I think it's essential that the PI is part of the community or region. It's hard to do this if you're a long distance away. We'll get into hospital administration in a little bit, but I'm not from an NCI designated cancer center, and there was all sorts of growing pains. That's putting it mildly. I was never trained in personnel issues, so we've had to vet a lot of staff to finally get ones that worked out. It's important. I actually have a day a week to do this. I have dedicated research time, communication with staff and the community. Unfortunately, from the NCI's perspective, they don't fund patient navigation anymore, and that's really the cornerstone of what we do. You have to have something to give back to the community. Been able to turn a 5-year program into a 14-year program, with an unbelievable amount of funding, but that's what it takes. And we'll talk about why in a moment we had to move the grant to Sioux Falls. And from my perspective, I would say it's absolute persistence to me. I just wear people down. And eventually, just don't say no. So there was a time about 15 months ago that with the hospital administration, I'll try to stay positive, but due to their kind of economic climate, they really weren't able to support the program anymore, even though it was our own money. So I made the calculated decision about 15 months ago to move Walking Forward to Avera. We decided to move on this trip. It's really to reduce mortality and quality of life. The populations of what we call serious low middle location. We'll get into this in this journal. And the ICEC is not going to be providing medical equipment, but it's going to be providing infrastructure for cancer professionals that want to get involved. So we're looking at three groups of physicians and healthcare providers. One are those that are father training, or just getting a career path. Two will be people that are basically retired, who have their retirement portfolio funded, but they have a lot still yet to give, and so we're tapping into those folks, and then kind of mid-career people as well. But the goal is really to help build capacity to reduce the burden of cancer globally. So radiation oncology is involved with this because in some countries, and we detail some of this, but on average, per 250,000 patients, you should have a linear accelerator. There are some countries in Africa where there's one linear accelerator per 11 million people. I mean, that's just unacceptable. And it's not that these countries don't have the money, it's just that they don't have the infrastructure to pull this together. And so one of the areas that we're really trying to target is cervical cancer, because globally, that's like the second leading cause of cancer death worldwide. And not so much in the US, but that's a cancer that's potentially preventable. With vaccines, it's screen detectable. And even if they aren't surgical candidates, they can be cured with basic radiation, using linear accelerators and brachytherapy. So that's another initiative that we have ongoing. And what we're trying to do is bring on hubs, so to speak, where we would become, right now they're virtual hubs, but Rapid City has been chosen as one through some of the lessons learned from Walking Forward, where we would help train some of these other investigators. So the idea would be I and some other people would go to another country for a week or so, and then probably one day every other week we would help mentor them to keep their programs up and running. So this is all detailed in this Frontiers in Oncology. It's a whole different subject, but it kind of relates to Walking Forward because it's kind of what we're trying to do with moving this forward. So this is what this looks like. This is, they're in the middle of trying to fundraise for this. Don't worry, I'm not asking for money. We're always looking for people that might be interested in participating. But Rapid City is one of the sites that's been selected. And that's kind of my 5 to 10 year goal, is to at some point have bricks and mortar to have some type of research institute out there. So I always say that if I have any people in the audience from Western North Dakota, that oil people, they want a research institute named after them, we'll do it. So these are the rest of my staff that I have the pleasure to work with. The middle gal is Jenny Liebernight. She's come on board as our genomics research consultant. Other people that we've worked with over time, Ashley Guadalajara is a radiation oncologist down in MD Anderson who did the research here with me. She was phenomenal. Linda Burhan-Stipanoff, many of you know. And just to conclude with our vision and mission, but the vision of walking forward is to improve the quality of life for American Indian cancer patients from early detection, successful treatments, and survivorship, including end-of-life care. And the mission is this has been and will continue to be accomplished through access to screening, state-of-the-art cancer treatments, clinical trials, and comprehensive patient navigation. But I would like to conclude with acknowledging one other person, that's Dr. Cower. And so Judith, I know you're online and down in Florida, but Judith was really instrumental in helping me write the grant back in 2002. Spirit of Eagles did fund a prostate cancer screening initiative that we had in Cheyenne River a number of years ago. She and I served on the Disparity Committee for NCCTG, and I was kind of reflecting on this last night because I haven't been here since about 2008, since they NCCTG wound down. But Judith, I know you're not here in person, but sincerely appreciate all your help over the years, and it's really been the only way that we've achieved sustainability is to reach out to other people. So special thanks to Dr. Cower, and I'm happy to take questions.
Questions here or related?
And it's great to see the payoff, and that two of the major new areas of research focus, including global health and precision or individualized medicine, whatever term you want to get to it, that those are areas that you're pursuing. And I think you and I can talk offline about some of the things that I'm hearing and some of the opportunities that might exist for us to move forward in this direction. Like you, I've done a lot of work with cervical cancer, and 2 years ago, I was invited to go to Ethiopia to talk about cervical cancer, palliative care, cancer care in general. And I thought to myself, why should I do that? I have so much to do here in the United States, but you know the parallels are uncanny in terms of what's happening worldwide that we've already seen in our own underserved communities. And so, you know, I really congratulate you for being a leader in that direction as well, because we really have to share knowledge. That's part of what we are called to do, and the fact that you're involved in that is very, you know, you learn a lot, and we all learn a lot from it. So thank you again for taking your time to come to Rochester, even though I'm not there.
Thanks, Judith. Yeah, no, we'll just definitely talk, because I'm sure Norm Coleman will love this visit with you. So, any other questions?
Other questions?
You conduct the survey. Was that
With the community survey?
Yeah.
Or, so that particular one, which is about 1,000 participants, actually, that's where I first met Ann Nicometto, as I came into Rochester to say, I need some help, I'm not sure how we're going to do this. But they helped us as far as designing the survey, and then some of the investigators, at that time it was Mary Alice Trapp, who went to Pine, Colorado to flush some of those, the survey out itself. But for each of the survey, it really requires having a focus group, which you have to have a decent tool, then you do the focus group, you have to have IRB approval for all this, and then once you have the focus group, then you go live with it. But in this community survey, it was about an hour-and-a-half interview for each participant. That was 1,000 participants.
one-on-one?
One-on-one. That one was. That was a huge undertaking. The rest of them haven't been quite that onerous, but there's been at least 2 publications out of that one. I saw Dr. Tiller roll his eyes. Yeah, I had staff doing that for me, but yeah, that was part of their initiative for the first 2 to 3 years. The other surveys were not as time consuming, but there's probably been at least a half a dozen of them done. I probably forgot about another half a dozen. But
Those were all the surveys were done one-on-one?
well, that one was. And then the cancer survey, that was about 100 participants. Well, most of them are done one-on-one in that computer. We've done some other, we did a clinical trials module to look at a customized one versus the NCI module for clinical trials, that one they did themselves, but the big surveys were one-on-one with the community survey. And
And
then
were those, how they're related to the community health needs assessment
yes,
survey?
yeah.
What was the same?
Well, we did the community needs, that was 1,000 participant, and then the cancer surveys, we wanted to look at for patients undergoing cancer treatment. Was there a change in trust, satisfaction, clinical trial participation? And a lot of this has been published as well. And then there's been some other smaller surveys. And one of the messages we do here from the community is we're tired of being asked the same stupid questions, so I'm sensitive to that. And there are certain groups that then when we do our educational events, I feel like we're doing the same group over and over. But we're talking about 70,000 people total. This is a huge population out there. Yeah, Wes,
I have another question. This relates to the smoking cessation and the use of the smartphone.
Yes.
In my experience, first of all, how are you funding the smartphones, and is that something that's?
Well, it was built into the protocol, but they're not smartphones. I mean, they receive text messages, but they're, I guess, dumb phones. But that's probably one of the lessons learned too, is we have other grants, and a couple survivorship grants using cell phones, but they have to have their own cell phone.
They have to have their own
Yes, now they do. On the smoking cessation, that was part of the protocol design, but we're running out of money because we have some people that are losing it to 4 to 5 phones. It's a nightmare.
And my experience is that folks may be able to purchase a month's worth of time on their cell phones, and then the number goes.
Oh, well, we provide that too. See, the cell phone bills have been outrageous, and so we just had to tell them, we've looked at, I mean, I don't look at it, thank God, but we get these stack of cell phone bills and saying, we just have to get back to them and say, you are not allowed to use this for 411 numbers. I mean, we just tell them, well, we're running out of money. So for the next, so we have a couple survivorship grants we're putting in for, and some are with cell phone technology, but they're gonna have their own cell phones. We can't fund it.
But then they'll have their own cell phone, but you'll be paying the monthly bill on it?
Well, right now we're still working through some of those details.
Yeah, that to me would be one of the stumbling blocks.
Well, right now we're covering
Keeping
everything. We're
Yeah.
doing the cell phone and the cell phone bills. You think your kids are bad? Yes, sorry.
Could you expand on the genomic study that you plan to do?
Sure. And again, I'm not an expert in this, but the investigators that were, the group that were part of it, the Vera, but they have a team of about 12 people, and they have sequencers, so they're gonna be doing the proteomics, the RNA, the DNA. Right now, you can do foundation one testing, which a lot of academic centers are using, and so basically it is, you sample the tumor, you send it out to the lab, they sequence the tumor and tell you what it's sensitive to, and so the report will come out of, okay, this tumor will respond to a PD-1 agent, or this tumor is an EGFR inhibitor. So the dilemma is, it's not quite ready for prime time yet, but right now they're going to be working primarily with recurrent ovarian cancers, which have had some really good results. Results meaning response rate to the second and third line of treatment, and they presented it at ASCO a couple months ago. So they're going to be providing that help to us for our cancer patients, both native and non-native. But it's just, and I'm oversimplifying this, but it is, the 10,000-foot view is you're sampling that tumor, typically it's recurrent disease, and you're finding out what the tumor signature is, so you know what chemotherapy agent to use. Of course, as a radiation oncologist, everything responds to radiation, so you have to kind of understand.
Well, I'm sure you'll have some time to
Yeah.
visit with you afterwards, so I want to thank you again.
Thank you for the